Kalmanskop, buried in sand. Kalmanskop is a ghost town in southern Namibia, a few kilometers inland from the port of Lüderitz. In 1908, Lüderitz was plunged into diamond fever, and people rushed into the Namib desert hoping to make an easy fortune. Within 2 years, a town, complete with a casino, school, hospital and exclusive residential buildings, was established in the barren sandy desert. But shortly after the drop in diamond sales after the First World War, the beginning of the end started. During the 1950s, the town was deserted and the dunes began to reclaim what was always theirs. Soon the metal screens collapsed, and the pretty gardens and tidy streets were buried under the sand. Doors and windows creaked on their hinges, cracked window panes stared sightlessly across the desert. A new ghost town had been born. A couple of old buildings are still standing, and some interiors like the theater is still in very good condition, but the rest are crumbling ruins demolished from grandeur to ghost houses. Pripyat, Chernobyl workers' home. Pripyat is an abandoned city in the zone of alienation in northern Ukraine. It was home to the Chernobyl nuclear power plant workers. Abandoned in 1986 following the Chernobyl disaster, its population had been around 50,000 prior to the accident. Until recently, the site was practically a museum, documenting the late Soviet era. Apartment buildings, swimming pools, hospitals and other buildings were all abandoned, and everything inside the buildings was left behind, including records, papers, TVs, children's toys, furniture, valuables, and clothing, etc. that any normal family would have with them. Residents were only allowed to take away a suitcase full of documents, books and clothes that were not contaminated. However, many of the apartment buildings were almost completely looted sometime around the beginning of the 21st century. Nothing of value was left behind, even toilet seats were taken away. Some buildings have remained untouched. Many of the building interiors have been vandalized and ransacked over the years. Because the buildings are not maintained, the roofs leak, and in the spring the rooms are flooded with water. It is not unusual to find trees growing on roofs, and even inside buildings. This hastens deterioration, and due to this, a 4-story school partially collapsed in July of 2005. Kowloon Walled City, Lawless City. The Kowloon Walled City was located just outside Hong Kong, China during British rule. A former watch post to protect the area against pirates, it was occupied by Japan during World War II, and subsequently taken over by squatters, after Japan's surrender. Neither Britain nor China wanted responsibility for it, so it became its own lawless city. Its population flourished for decades, with residents building labyrinthine corridors above the street level, which was clogged with trash. The buildings grew so tall that sunlight couldn't reach the bottom levels, and the entire city had to be illuminated with fluorescent lights. It was a place where brothels, casinos, opium dens, cocaine parlors, food courts serving dog meat, and secret factories ran unmolested by authorities. It was finally torn down in 1993, after a mutual decision was made by British and Chinese authorities, who had finally grown wary of the unsanitary, anarchic city, and its out-of-control population. Gunkanjima, the Forbidden Island. This island is one among 505 uninhabited islands in the Nagasaki Prefecture of Japan, about 15 kilometers from Nagasaki itself. It is also known as Gunkanjima, or Battleship Island, thanks to its high sea walls. It began in 1890 when a company called Mitsubishi bought the island and began a project to retrieve coal from the bottom of the sea. This attracted much attention, and in 1916 they were forced to build Japan's first large concrete building on the island, a block of apartments that would both accommodate the seas of workers and protect them from hurricanes. In 1959, population had swelled, and boasted a density of 835 people per hectare for the whole island, one of the highest population densities ever recorded worldwide. As petroleum replaced coal in Japan in the 1960s, coal mines began shutting down all over the country, and Hashima's mines were no exception. In 1974, Mitsubishi officially announced the closing of the mine, and today it is empty and bare, with travel currently prohibited. The island was the location for the 2003 film Battle Royale 2, and inspired the final level of popular Asian video game Killer 7. Krakow, a fascinating medieval town. Krakow is located in the region of Basilicata, and the province of Matera, about 25 miles inland from the Gulf of Taranto at the instep of the boot of Italy. This medieval town is typical of those in the area, built up with long undulating hills all around that allow for the farming of wheat and other crops. Krakow can be dated back to 1060 when the land was in the ownership of Archbishop Arnaldo, Bishop of Tricarico. This long-standing relationship with the church had much influence over the inhabitants throughout the ages. In 1891, the population of Krakow stood at well over 2,000 people, though there had been many problems, with poor agricultural conditions creating desperate times. Between 1892 and 1922, over 1,300 people moved from the town to North America. Poor farming was added to by earthquakes, landslides, and war, all of which contributed to this mass migration. Between 1959 and 1972, Krakow was plagued by these landslides and quakes. In 1963, the remaining 1,800 inhabitants were transferred to a nearby valley called Krakow-Pesztyra, and the original Krakow remains in a state of crumbling decay to this day.